There's a lot of people that say hurt people hurt people. I'll change that to untreated hurt people sometimes hurt people. And what it actually is, there's this whole nature versus nurture argument. I want to blow that out of the water because it's not nature versus nurture. It's bio, psycho, and social altogether. It's nature, nurture, and psychology. So bio is your genetics. You're born with potentialities.
Way of Will John.
Okay, well, listen, Jim, thanks for being here. Obviously, as we were already kind of talking about, there's so much that we're going to be able to dig into. And it's fascinating, just all the work that you've done and do. So maybe just throw us a little bit of an intro into who you are.
Well, my name's Jim Clemente. I'm a retired FBI profiler. I was in the Bureau for 22 years. I was a prosecutor for New York City before that. And I've been fortunate enough to be able to sort of train my brain in behavioral sciences and use that to try to help people.
So you mentioned, obviously, your studies in behavioral sciences, in the behavioral sciences and all of this stuff. I can't imagine how you put together a study pack for someone that has to do what you've done. So give me an understanding of, actually, let's frame it in the way that you would frame it for somebody who wants to maybe follow in the path that you've gone. Now that you've done what you've done, studied in the formal settings that you've done it in, if I tomorrow wanted to set off on your path, how would you train me? What would you tell me? What books would you have me read? What would you have me do?
Okay, well, first of all, I would say there's two paths. There's the educational path, and then there's the experiential path. And I think, for example, when I was going to law school, I was pretty poor. I was working my way through law school. Didn't have money to go out in Manhattan on the weekends, but I would take a milk crate down to Times Square, and I'd sit on the corner up against the building, and I'd watch people. And I'd try to, at any given time, there's 100, 150, 200,000 people walking through there on a given night. So it was an amazing way to just study people from different places, different backgrounds. And I would just listen to snippets of their conversations. It would be very entertaining to me to try to figure out who they were and where they were from and what was going on. Why were they there? And then the other side of it is, I was a chemistry major in college. So that taught me how to think logically and investigate. And then I was a lawyer. I went to law school and was a prosecutor after that. And I think that helped me also think on my feet and learn how to look at both sides of an issue. And that became critically important when I became a profiler, because you have to learn to think like the offenders so that you can figure out their next moves and hopefully interdict, catch them, throw them in jail for the rest of their lives. So for me, when I got into the profiling unit, before I got there, first of all, I got about 10 years of experience investigating major cases on task forces with local law enforcement, and also doing everything I could to continue my study, my own independent study of behavior, reading John Douglas's books, Roy Hazelwood's books, Robert Ressler's books. All of those really helped me understand what they did for a living. And then when I got into the unit, we have a 2-year apprenticeship program. I completed it in 1 year, but there's a 480-hour course that we take, and it's basically one-on-one with experts from around the world. Whether it's Dr. Park Dietz teaching us abnormal psychology, Dr. 𝗪𝗂𝗯𝘀 from Scotland teaching us neuro-linguistic programming, Dr. Robert Hare from Canada teaching us the psychopathy checklist. So we get that intensive training while we're there, and then you just literally work with a bunch of other people on cases, and sometimes you're surprised by how your perspective can actually add to the mix. And I think that was critically important, like in the very first case that I profiled. Am I talking too much?
No. You could go as long as you want. Like if I literally just sit here and you just tell crazy stories, that would be the goal.
Well, you want me to tell you that story? I could tell you that story if you want.
Please.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the very first case that I was a profiler on I was actually the brand new guy in the room. There was probably 10 or 15 other profilers who had many years of experience in the room as well. And we got the presentation from the chief detective on the case, and the district attorney was also in the room. And this was a case where a young female physician was murdered. She was shot in her car in the parking lot in front of her clinic. She had one clinic in a very wealthy neighborhood, and this was another clinic that she had sort of to pay back um, in a very rough neighborhood. And so she's found shot 5 times, and there's no witnesses. They were able to develop one camera down the street at a car dealership, and sort of the very top, sort of like the mirror you see in the corner here, the very top of that camera that was aimed down at the cars at the lot showed a block down. You could actually see part of the parking lot, and you could see her car pull into the space, but you could only see right up to the top of the door before the window started. And so this is the passenger side of the car. And so at some point, you see what looks like a male approaching, stopping at that door, opening the door, getting in, and about 90 seconds later, getting out and walking away. And that's all you see. There's nothing else. And then we looked at the autopsy report, and this woman was shot 3 times through the heart, and once in her right shoulder, basically an arm. So one through the arm and shoulder, and one through her side. And as everybody was trying to figure out this case, what happened, of course, what you do is you play it through your mind. How did this happen? And what happened was, I said, listen, um, this guy who killed this woman uh, was close to her, knew her very well. She trusted him, and he was left-handed. And they're like, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "Well, as I play this through my mind, I'm trying to determine why she ended up dead in this position, why she was shot in the positions that she was shot in." And what I did was I played it out as if the guy who came into the car was right-handed first, and if he was, she would have fought him by pushing the gun forward towards the windshield. And if the gun went off, it would have put a hole in the windshield. But if he was left-handed, then the gun would have been more to her right side. And if she didn't feel like she was going to just sit there and get shot by this guy, she would have to rotate back and grab the gun with both hands and push it back between the seats. And she did that until he bit her. There was a upside down bite mark on the back of her left triceps. So that's the thing that made me know that she rotated all the way around. And both of their hands were on the gun. The only weapon that he had left was his mouth. He bites her on the back of the arm. She lets go of the gun. He's able to shoot her then in the side, under her arm, through her arm, and then to kill her, he brings the gun around front and shoots her 3 times in the heart. And so all of that was because when I looked at it, I happen to be left-handed. And I looked at it from a left-handed perspective, and no one else in the room did. I looked around and nobody else was writing with their left hand. I was the only one. I told them this, and this is where it really got crazy. When I told them this, I could see the detective and the prosecutor exchanging a very serious look. And I said, "What's wrong?" And they said, "Her ex-husband is left-handed." And I said, "Okay, so what's the problem?" And they said, "He's our chief of detectives."
Oh my God.
So he was the boss of the detective that was sitting in front of me. And as it turned out, he was convicted of the murder. Now, before that, they had no idea. But then when they started going back and looking at his behavior right after the events, when they went to to notify him that his wife had been killed, he was on the floor on his hands and knees in the foyer of his house, scrubbing the floor with Clorox. He's supposed to be at work, but he's home doing this. They're like, what's going on? And they said, oh, yeah. He said, oh, there was a mess, so I'm cleaning it up. But what that also did was destroy the paraffin test that would tell that he fired a weapon recently. And then the alibi that he had fell apart. And then when the police commissioner went to visit him at the prison, at the jail right after he got arrested, the police commissioner said, look, we can't really talk about this case. And he started spouting off about how dental evidence is weak and unreliable. So he focused on the one thing he didn't plan. The plan was to shoot her and go away. But she fought him, and he had to bite her, leaving forensic evidence behind. And that's what he focused on. So all those things together helped convict him. But again, it was because I was left-handed and because I looked at all those details, and I needed in my own mind to figure out how this happened. And as it turned out, it turned out to be a very, very insightful perspective. And that taught me that always use whatever you have. Your life experience is going to be tremendously important in terms of how you analyze cases and how you come up with the proper answers.
𝗦𝘂𝗯𝗀𝗏, the elite private membership club for the modern mystic, exploring powerful teachings on spirituality, self-awareness, ancient wisdom, a deep dive into meditation, mindfulness, and transformational practices designed for those ready to lead their own journey. Are you ready to step up? Do you generally find in cases like that, or were you finding in cases like that you were having eureka moments like this? Or would it be a kind of a case where you could be stuck for an incredibly long period of time not trying to understand things?
Yeah, there's a whole spectrum of cases, and the amount of information you have varies dramatically. There are some that you're stuck for a very long period of time. However, what I found as I went on in time as a profiler, I learned to really trust my gut instincts. In the middle of this process, I got cancer. I was a first responder on 9/11, and a whole bunch of us, 8 other FBI agents, like 80 cops and firemen at the time, got the same kind of lymphoma. And I had to go through chemo, and then I had to have a bone marrow transplant, a stem cell transplant. And as a result of that, when I came back to work, I was very weak. I didn't have a lot of strength. I didn't have a lot of patience. And I felt like part of what the chemo did to me was really made my nerves endings very sensitive. And so it was kind of overwhelming at first. But what it did was it helped me become more sensitive to the data that I was taking in. And when you go to a crime scene, you're not just looking at aspects of the crime. I mean, there's the temperature, there's the colors, there's the different spatial relationships, the feeling, the textures, all of those things your brain takes in, and then you use them to become more able to recount all those details. So the more sensory information you have, the easier it is to have a total recall of all that data that you're taking in. So instead of focusing on little tiny things, I tried to take in everything, all of the details around me. And then I found that I had much better recall. And I found that in recounting the issues that were present at a crime scene, that I had the ability to, in a very quick time, be able to analyze it because I was letting my subconscious actually do the work for me. Your conscious mind is pretty fast. It works in thousandths of a second. That's pretty fast. But your subconscious mind works in 10 billionths of a second. So it's like 100 million times faster than your conscious mind. So if you let your brain take in, your subconscious take in all this information and let it do the math, when you have the confidence that your gut is going to churn all that and spit out the right answer, that's when you become a really good profiler. And in seconds, you can analyze a case that sometimes has been baffling people for decades. And I did find that in some cases where the issues were so complicated that everybody was getting bogged down in all those details, and I let my brain do its work, and I felt confident that I'll figure it out. And people at first were like, why don't you shut up and let everybody else finish speaking before you you speak? You know, and sometimes I did, but sometimes I just said, look, there's no reason to waste time. This is what we have to do. This is what happened. And I can give you examples of that if you want, but uh I don't know if I'm talking too much.
You don't trust me. You are not talking too much. There's nothing. We were just in the break. Jalen was mentioning that I said the story was that was an incredible story and interesting, and he said it sounds like Criminal Minds. And I go, do you know
There's
that?
a
I think
reason why.
he didn't know that. He didn't know that. And I'm like, yeah, that's crazy.
Okay.
So okay, then I have, which will kind of get me to some stuff. Here's a great question. Now, this is the type of stuff that, growing up, CSI is one of those things that just entered the world. It's in our lexicon, as it's in the entire, at least American zeitgeist, if not many places on earth. How much of that is complete and utter nonsense? Because I want to understand if I can, like, how far off are we in these worlds? Like, it just
Okay.
makes it seem so tangible, like nothing is slipping past. Where's the reality?
Okay. All right. So the difference between this is a great way to point out the difference between CSI and Criminal Minds. All right. So CSI, Crime Scene Investigations, that show, unfortunately, has created what we call the CSI effect, and juries will watch that show and think, when you're on a jury, you're sitting there and you're waiting for the high definition multi-camera angle video of actually what happened, a slow motion projection of how the bullet entered the body, all the different functions, because that's what they do. Everybody looks glamorous. All the scenes are incredibly well set. All the labs have blue light in the background, and the morgues have windows to outside. I mean, it's just everything is beautiful, and that's just not reality. The morgues are usually in basements. The people, the cops, you know, they look like me. They're not these glamorous people who are models and actors and so forth. And they basically deal with whatever budget they have. And there's 17,000, at least 17,000 police departments in the United States. And a lot of them are one or two person departments. They don't have much of a budget. They don't get extreme training in crime scene investigations. And even in LAPD and NYPD, the two biggest departments in the country, there are issues with manpower and time and just the sheer number of crimes. So it's not like that. Now, on the other hand, Criminal Minds, what I attempted to do, and I was only able to do that because the showrunner, the original showrunner, was Ed Bernero, who was a former cop. And he asked me to assist in the show. And I said, great, as long as you help us do our job and don't hurt it. And he's like, what do you mean? And I said, every TV show and every movie shows the FBI sweeping in, stealing the case, and telling the locals to go home. And that's not what we do. We assist the locals because that's what our job is. We study violent and sexual crimes across the country and around the world, and then we educate law enforcement and we assist in and assess crimes while they're happening. So that's what we do. And the difference is, where CSI Effect has damaged cases, I believe Criminal Minds has helped people, because you can't watch a show and then all of a sudden, this is going to be a little graphic, you can't all of a sudden be turned on by severing somebody's leg. you know, that's something that, it's sort of innate, all right? That's something that you develop over a long period of time. Watching it on TV isn't going to teach you how to do that. But it has taught, with the victim focus that we have on that show, it has taught people what grooming is. What are risks when you're out in public? What are risks when you're walking through the woods alone at night? What are risks when you're driving with your family in an unknown area and your car breaks down? How can people take advantage of those vulnerabilities? And therefore, if you know what the risks are, you can help prepare and prevent them. In fact, I think that's one of the main reasons why women are the number one consumers of true crime and crime shows, because women are naturally more empathetic than men. And I believe they're protectors. They want to learn everything bad that can happen so they can protect those that they love. I don't think it's a negative thing at all. I think it's something that drives them, that is part and parcel of being a good person. And it's not just some morbid fascination with these bad things that can happen.
That's an interesting take, and very it does make a whole lot of sense. And what I have found fascinating about all this stuff also as well. I mean, to take it back to the beginning as well, because you mentioned NLP and you mentioned, I believe it was the
Psychopathy
psychopathy
checklist.
checklist. Yes, there you go. What does that look like? Because NLP also falls into one of the, at least I don't know enough about NLP and natural or neuro-linguistic programming. Is that what it stands
Yes,
for?
that's it.
Yes.
Perfect. Yeah.
And I know that it gets pulled into almost on one end a very serious science that people have found to be very helpful and utilize, and on the other end, I do this, this, and this, and then you give me all of your money, or this, and this, and the girl is just, oh my God, So help me understand where those fall within your realm.
Well, I mean, we use it. Neuro-linguistic programming is basically how we process information, how we store it, and how we retrieve it, and how to maximize the amount of information you can take in and still retrieve and utilize. Yeah, some people do try to use it to manipulate other people, and that's certainly not what we're doing with it. What we're doing is we're trying to understand behavior, and by it can help in, for example, deception detection, and it can help in terms of understanding, let's say, behavior at a crime scene, or what made a particular victim more vulnerable in a particular situation. And what what I would caution people away from is thinking that any one thing is a silver bullet. We use multiple avenues and procedures to one, take in information, and two, analyze it, and three, try to convey that back to the people that need to know what's actually going on.
Uh-huh. And does that ever get used? Did you have to interrogate people?
Oh, absolutely.
So would some of these, what is that like? What is it like, especially in a case where someone is, and I'm not saying like, and I know you're mainly dealing with quite either horrific or explicit crimes and stuff like this, and so nothing, not the banal stuff. What is like have you ever felt in danger during an interrogation? Have you ever felt like, is it palpable, this person's violence or their psychopathic nature? Like that, I would love to understand that, because that's something that a normal person or a civilian is never going to get a chance to experience what that's really like, and you can't watch a video and quite get it.
Right. I think the best video depiction of it was probably in the series Mindhunter. And Ed Kemper, the guy who played Ed Kemper, had an interaction with the character that was John Douglas. And he's a very big guy. He's like 6'7" or something like that, or 6'9". And he literally, with his words and just a touch on his shoulder, literally caused John Douglas to have a severe panic attack. And when somebody is that evil, you can detect it in their demeanor, in their eyes, in the tone of their voice, and all of those things can convey a tremendous amount of coldness. The shark eyes, there's absolutely nothing that I care about in relation to you. They can convey that to you very convincingly because they've had experience doing it. And I'll say the most difficult interrogations that I did were probably when I went down to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. I mean, these were terrorists that were arrested, many of them in battlefields, trying to blow up Americans or after having blown up Americans and so forth. And of course, many of them, we were trying to determine what their ties were to 9/11 and so forth. But when I went down there, I found out that they were basically mistreating and doing things all the way up to the verge of torturing people and potentially crossing that line. And I immediately told them this is not how you interrogate people, because despite the fact that you might hate them, that you might despise them, that you might be creeped out by them, or you might be afraid of them, you have to build rapport if you're going to get accurate and reliable information from them. I had to fight these Marines and the general that was there because they wanted to do all this horrible stuff to these people, and they thought they were going to get some kind of good and reliable information, and they weren't getting anything, which is why they asked me to go down there, because I was an expert in investigative interviewing or interrogation. And so I taught them how to do it properly. I had to fight them. It took a long time for them to actually start implementing those procedures, and they were able to do that effectively. But what I'm saying is, sitting across from some of these people who have literally grown up from the moment they're conscious, hating us and wanting to kill us, and looking for any opportunity to do so, including in an interrogation room in Cuba, yeah, it's a little unsettling. But what you have to do is you have to train yourself to basically be of two minds. You have your own mind and how you really feel and react and what you like to do. But then there's the mind you have to develop, and it's clinically detached, and it is something that you have to professionally perfect, because the minute they see a chink in that, they'll take advantage of it. So the best thing, and I did write an episode of Criminal Minds about this called Lessons Learned, and it's in season 2. The best thing you can possibly do is treat people that are sitting across from you with dignity and respect, and build a bridge of human kindness, because they're obviously at a disadvantage. They've been arrested. They're sitting there, in chains sometimes, behind bars, and you hold all the cards basically. But if you treat them with dignity and respect, it undermines their expectations. They're expecting you to treat them harshly. They're expecting you to reinforce all the negative things they've learned about you since birth. You undermine that expectation. They really don't know what to do. And they act as a human being to you. And that's all you're trying to get them to do.
𝗦𝘂𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀.com. Exclusive content and programs on manifestation, making money, hidden knowledge. Finally, reach your full potential.
It kind of makes me wonder as well about the times potentially. Have you ever been wrong?
Oh, listen, it's a process. Every single profile that we write says this information, the following analysis is based on what we have available to us right now. There was a case where a small child was killed and her body was found, and her father had called up the next day, called up the non-emergency police line and said, can't find my daughter. And he sounded really weird. And the guy's taking the information, and then he said, how old is she? And he said, 10 months. And he's like, what? And you're talking like this. Anyway, he became the major suspect. The police officers interrogated him, and there was all sorts of issues. They kind of got what they thought was a confession, and they gave it to us. They showed us the tape, and they told us that this was the entirety of his interrogation. Well, as it turns out, they had him in that room for 4 hours before they turned on the tape. And in those 4 hours, they They told him the details of what happened to his daughter. And when they turned on the tape, when he recounted them, it looked like he had knowledge that only the killer would know. And he was convicted based on that. And then he was acquitted. And he sued that police department for like $15 million. Well, the information they gave us did look like he was guilty. He had all this guilty information. He had his behavior just reeked of something wrong. Well, what we didn't know was that he was up all night getting high, and he was still high in the morning when he called the police. And he was so high that he didn't realize the guy who was staying with the girl across the street, who happened to be a convicted sex offender, who happened to be a burglar, broke into his house, took the daughter, killed her. And when he woke up, he was just bewildered, but he was still high. And that's why his behavior was bad. So yeah, if the data input is wrong, then the result's going to be wrong. But you hope that these are lessons learned and that people don't do that in the future, because we have to we have to rely on and trust the information that we get. But sometimes people just are looking at the end result. They just want to get this guy because they believe he's guilty, because he's acting weird. And, and other times, it's allowed me to cut through all the crap and actually focus on the really important stuff, and actually in a fraction of the time they've already spent, actually resolve the case in a way that turned out to be correct. So yeah, it's not perfect, and a lot depends on the person who's doing it and the information that they're taking in.
Are you following at all the Mangione case? This is
Luigi?
the Luigi. Yeah, I believe it's Mangione. I'm. That's just it's that part is. Did the FBI take over portions of that investigation? I don't know what's going on, obviously, quite well. I was in New York shortly after.
Yeah. Well, the fact that you don't know what's going on means the FBI is doing their job.
Okay.
It is not, especially when the person is already apprehended. It's not a two-way street. I mean, they take in data, but it's supposed to go out only during the trial. A lot of times defense attorneys will have all these, press conferences, and they'll put all this information out to the media, trying to try the case in the public's eye. But that's not how the FBI is supposed to do things. Every now and then, they will announce things or make a public plea when they're doing an investigation, when they're still trying to take in information. That's important. But when they're actually in the midst of the investigation and they have whatever public information they already need, they shouldn't be talking about it. And it should be a surprise when it comes to trial.
Well, yeah, actually, obviously, I really don't even know. I mean, Jalen, you might even want to kind of look up where and what's going on with that currently right now. But I just remember the entire ruckus of him being transported from one area to the next, and how that was a whole scene, and what was going on.
They call it the perp walk.
The perp walk, yes. Can you help me understand what and why? Is there any shady business? Should I be reading into the fact that this guy, high profile, and why are we seeing this? I don't see this ever. I don't remember ever seeing this except in movies.
I mean, historically, the FBI used to do it all the time with mob bosses when they arrested them, because they wanted that image out there. They wanted to cut the legs off of them, and they knew that their effectiveness as a mob boss would be completely undermined if they were seen as at all cooperative with law enforcement, right? So there can be strategic reasons for it. There can also be wanting to show off reasons for it, and those are not good. And I think almost invariably, perp walks can be eliminated. People can be brought in and out of courtrooms undercover. There's no reason for everything to be, splashed over every media source. However, I do also know that police departments and law enforcement agencies and prosecutors' offices a lot of times have to get funding. They have to do their job. And sometimes the way they get funding is by showing the public how effective they've been. And so that may be one reason why it's still done, to engender more interest in what they're doing. I know that the ATF, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, that and the NCIS, that's even a better one. The NCIS, Naval Criminal Investigative Service, since that show came on, their budget doubled 8 times. They had on the show the actual director of that agency because he was so happy that that show was out there, because lawmakers and people who gave them money watched the show and loved it, and so their budget kept growing. They don't do a millionth of what they do on that show in real life, but people believe it. They see it on TV, and the money starts pouring in.
Right. Yeah, the case is a strange one. I mean, obviously, you could do a whole entire, I'm sure, look at, and probably from your perspective, it's got to be a pretty cool position to be in when things do go on and happen, because you have such inside experience for so long. Your view, I mean, my view as a civilian is just looking at like, wow, what happened? You're probably, your subconscious is already firing, maybe even on, so many different levels, unless you shut it down. But
Well,
go ahead.
well, I know one of the questions that they had told me that you wanted to ask me about was, how can the media help? And I think this is a perfect segue into that, because um, one of the ways that the media hurts investigations and actually puts people at risk is by making grandstanding, um, very over-the-top statements about offenders. Actually, for the last 25 years, we have been telling media outlets, do not name the offender, because almost invariably, every school shooter, every mass killer, and many of the jerks you'll see doing very bad things, some of them in the news right now in trial, live for the media, live for their 15 minutes of fame. When you give their all the things they did, all the bad things they did, and tell people their name, all that does is encourage these other jerks who have really poor self-images, who have no lives at all, who want to be famous or infamous. You're giving them more ammunition, and you're encouraging them to actually be the next biggest thing. You're actually encouraging them to do one better for the people before them. And that is incredibly reckless. And no matter how many times we have seen this happen, where subsequent shooters refer in their diaries or their manifestos or their daily interactions or their social media, when they refer to other people who've gone before them doing really bad things, we still mention their names instead of ripping that away from them and just say the suspect, and just say the person who did this, the criminal who did this, and put them in their proper place. It will rob them of one of the most important things to them, and hopefully they'll be able to find other ways to address their issues rather than trying to become infamous.
Right, right. Yeah, there's a hope that it'll deter that. I mean, it's an interesting thing, especially because of the school shootings and the issues that we have in the US with that. And I know there was a call to stop doing that. I mean, I grew up during the Columbine shootings, and that being one of the ones that I think basically definitely changed the way we viewed things. And it's not something that happens in Europe. I sit over here in Europe now. It's not really something that happens in Europe, and it has happened a couple times over here, and they have immediately not, in most cases, in the cases that I've seen, named that person. And I know that's coming from, a push for people like yourself to do that. But you mentioned one thing that I definitely have to ask you about, which is the manifesto part, because it seems so much, and I don't know if this is another TV effect / film effect. Every time we catch a suspect, and even in the case we were just talking about, there's a manifesto, there's a diary, there's a serial killer has these notebooks and these journals and all that. How much of that is actually happening? If you could give me a percentage of the serial killers, of the murders with premeditated thought on things, are they really writing? I mean, I believe in the New York case, the guy had it on him. He had a manifesto on him. Like, doesn't that seem insane? I mean, it seems insane to me, coming from a person who's not a serial killer. So I wouldn't understand. But is that real? I don't understand.
Yeah, well, it's not insane. It actually tells you a tremendous amount about him and what he actually wanted to do. He thought he might get killed. He wanted to make sure that his words and his justifications and his name is out there. And so that's the way to ensure it. If he didn't have it on him and they weren't able to identify him and they never got to his house by the time, in time to get his manifesto, then they may not see it. He was trying to ensure exactly what his goal was. And a lot of times, there's a shooter that hit somebody in the ear recently, and that guy, they keep saying, well, we haven't figured out his motive yet. Yes, you have. His motive was incredibly blatant from the first second. He found out that a very famous person was going to be nearby. He figured he would try to get to a place where he could take a shot at him, and he did it. He did it for the fame, period. He was probably suicidal, and there's a very fine line between suicidal and homicidal ideation. Once you lose the respect for your own life, you have no respect for anybody else's. So if he wants to go out, he's going to go out with a big bang, and he's going to make sure people know his name. And that's why he did what he did. And there's no question about that. But there's no written manifesto there. He didn't tell people. What I'm saying is his behavior screamed it out. And some people are not confident that their behavior will scream it out, so they write it down. Or they build up over time in their journals, in their diaries, whatever. And for example, Unabomber, who was probably one of the most infamous, I mean, it was the longest murderous bombing campaign in the history of the U.S. He had written this manifesto, and my buddy Jim Fitzgerald actually had to make the determination, do we print it or not? And he rightfully said, we have to print it, because as soon as we do, somebody will recognize this writing, because I am certain he has written like this before. And in fact, one of his doctoral theses was on this same exact topic. And Jim Fitzgerald was able to match those papers, 633 points of linguistic comparison between those two papers. And that's how we proved it was the actual offender. And that's how we got the search warrant signed, because until Fitz did that, the judge would not sign a search warrant for that cabin in the woods. We talk about it in my series Manhunt Unabomber if you want to get all the details of that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a case that I actually don't even remember very well. I mean, I'm not even sure how old I was. But when was that, roughly?
Well, I believe he was arrested in 94, 95 or something like that. 96, probably.
Okay. You also, in research for the talk today, I believe I saw that you were potentially involved in profiling the DC sniper stuff. Is that correct?
That's correct. My brother and I, my brother was also an FBI agent, and we were both living and working in the Washington, D.C. area. I was in the profiling unit in Quantico. He was in the Washington field office in D.C. And we actually arrived at one of the crime scenes at exactly the same time because it was almost equidistant from our houses. And we ended up working the case despite the fact that the FBI kind of took a back seat and let the local sheriff run the case because we were still, this was only a year after 9/11, we were still heavily engaged in basically trying to shut down all the organizations that helped 9/11 happen. So we ended up working the case sort of unofficially, I guess I would say. But I ended up at one of the crime scenes and found the shell casing. My brother found the shell casing and one of the notes at another crime scene. And my buddy Jim Fitzgerald, who I already mentioned, he did a forensic analysis of the actual writings. So they had left a tarot card. After Chief Moose, unfortunately, didn't listen to our advice, we said, look, snipers have a God complex. Don't challenge him, because then he will prove you wrong. And all you're doing is encouraging him to do worse. And unfortunately, the chief got up there, called him a coward. The mayor, the governor, everybody got up there and called him a coward. The chief ends the press conference by saying, the streets are safe, the schools are safe. So the next morning, they shot a kid on his way into school. And they left the tarot card, and on the top of the tarot card, it said, call me God. You would think at that point that they would understand that we know what we're talking about. You don't want to challenge these people. What we told them is surreptitiously work it into the conversations. Say, only God knows why this is happening. We put it in the hands of God to hopefully resolve this amicably, and giving him the imprimatur of godlike power, because that's what he's looking for. And if you satisfy that, he doesn't have to prove it anymore. Anyway, as we went on, we did the profile, and everybody in the room was saying that, look, this guy did 6 shots, 6 kills in one day. No degradation of his skills. This guy planned and executed these incredibly horrific crimes in a row in a very short period of time. Hit and run, hit and run, hit and run, hit and run. And there was nothing. There was no decompensation. So this wasn't a spree killing, which generally we will see some kind of degradation. They'll make mistakes along the way. This guy did it perfectly. So we said this guy has to be military or police trained and experienced. He's actually shooting targets is not the same as shooting a human being and taking a life. This guy must have actually been on the front lines in law enforcement or in the military. And we said he must be like in his mid 40s, at least, because he's calm, cool, and collected under fire like that. And so Fitz speaks up and says, yeah, but we have a tarot card and it says, this is for you, Mr. Police. Like he's looking up to the police. But it's also, Mr. Police is a line from reggae songs, and it can be disrespectful. But it says, no press. Press is something that people who are older might say, but Mr. Police is something that people who are younger might say. So he said there's a dichotomy here. And he also said the other note that was found on lined piece of notepaper, pink. And it had little stars that you get on your tests when you do well, when you're in kindergarten. What the hell? Maybe he used it to catch people's attention, but still, what kind of self-respecting 45-year-old is going to do that? So Fitz says, look, I know what you're saying, but if this guy is an adult, he's barely an adult. I think he's actually mid-teens. And everyone's like, that's outrageous. No way a mid-teenager could do this. And I said, well, then, either this guy is 45 years old, incredibly trained and experienced, and he decompensates when he writes to us, or for the first time in U.S. history, we have a sniper team. And they're like, no, snipers don't play well together. They've always been loners. And I said, what if one of them's older and experienced and the other one's younger and he's training him? Yeah, still they don't work well. And I said, what if he's molesting him to control him completely? And it was like, you're an expert in sex crimes. That's why you think that. And 11 years later, 𝗦𝘂𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 came out and said he was molesting me from the moment he took me out of that men's shelter. So that is another case in which the nuances is what told us exactly who did it. And Fitz said, I believe there is Caribbean influence here, and 𝗦𝘂𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 was Jamaican. He said that that there was evidence of African American dialect. He believed that there were two black males, and I said one of them was 45 and one of them was 15, and we put out the profile, and these guys were arrested. I mean, right around 24 hours later.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I have a friend who grew up during that time over there in that area and just explained to me how absurd it was. I mean, of course, it captured the entire country. How can it not, being in the capital and all that? But I knew, having you on, obviously, and seeing that profiling would be so, because it just seems like such an impossibility, right? It could be. And where do you start?
Yeah, and if the FBI had been in full force on that case, we probably would have put 3,000 to 5,000 agents out on the street and just formed a gauntlet and shut everything down. As it were, we just had sporadic agents working, and then unfortunately, a woman who was a clerk at the FBI. I mean, she worked there. She was killed, and my brother was the first law enforcement on that scene, and it was a terrible, terrible time. People were crawling out of their cars to go to grocery stores. All the gas stations had big tarps hanging down, so you could drive in and pump your gas. It was a very, very difficult time. Again, we did an audio series on that called "Call Me God," and we go into very great detail about all of it on that case.
Oh, wow. I mean, we'll definitely link to all of that. I have just another question towards, let's say for the layman here, because you mentioned how important critical thinking is, obviously, within what you do, and then obviously pushing it back to your subconscious, which echoes exactly what we do and teach on we have a language channel. We have language education. You cannot speak, obviously, our mother tongues are English, right? I mean, if we were forced to search for words constantly, you can't have a conversation, right? And so you're in the same boat. I mean, it echoes across sports as well.
That's interesting. Yeah.
If you want to learn how to kick a ball, I mean, first you're learning the mechanics. You can't do it, and then it becomes second nature, and then you can get into this upper level of thinking, which is kind of what you're talking about. That just gets triggered when you walk into a scene. So I'm very, very curious if you could suppress your knowledge or compress your knowledge rather into some form of a bite-sized, the way the world is, and the fact that we can't pay attention because TikTok is rotting our brains. Could you give us a bite-sized masterclass on critical thinking, on how to kind of understand and kind of estimate maybe a person or a situation or whatever helps you make decisions?
Well, I think any of your listeners who are parents know this, that when their child maybe turns around 13, they start being a little more rebellious and their behavior changes, and they'll tell you something that absolutely is a lie. And you know it immediately, but why do you know it? And that is because you have a long history of experience with them. You've seen them under normal circumstances, and now you're seeing a change in behavior, right? If you want to be effective at critical thinking, you have to put in good, reliable information, and that's into your brain, into your subconscious. Garbage in, garbage out. If you listen to people, quasi experts, people who, well, they read about this, they read articles about this case, they read a book once about it, whatever it is, or they're just really good and charismatic at presenting things. If you listen to them and you take in their data, I'm afraid that you're not going to be able to use it properly. What's going to happen is it's going to cloud and interfere with what you know as a person, your own experiences. And some people's experiences are extreme. But you have the ability to discern, and you have the ability to filter in and filter out things. And I think the best way for me to say this, let me just give you an example. There's a lot of people that say hurt people hurt people. But I'll change that to untreated hurt people sometimes hurt people. And what it actually is, there's this whole nature versus nurture argument. And I want to blow that out of the water, because it's not nature versus nurture. It's bio, psycho, and social altogether. It's nature, nurture, and psychology. So bio is your genetics. You're born with potentialities. Now, not everything's going to express, but you have a particular human potential, and that has to do with, who you are and what your personality starts out as, and also what your intellectual levels are and your physical abilities, and all sorts of things are all kind of mashed into that genetics. That stuff is stamped at the moment of conception, I believe, right? So that's the biological part of it. And then there's a psychological part of it, and that is your personality and your psychology. And the way we participate in forming our personality and psychology is the thousands or tens of thousands of tiny little decisions we make in the privacy of our own brains. It starts when you're just cognizant, when you're a kid. And every time you cry, that blob thing that's kind of unfocused, that's your mother, comes and helps you. So you learn how to manipulate that person by crying. Now, you get a little older and you see there's another blob over there. Wait a minute. And that thing is crying. Now, do you say, hey, no, I want my attention? So you go and hit that other baby that's over there. Or do you say, you know what? Mommy was so good to me, I'm going to do the same and be good to this person. And that's a decision that's made. And those tiny little decisions that we reinforce have this snowball effect. And you're rolling down the hill, and as the snowball is getting bigger and bigger to the point where you're basically doing things that you shouldn't be doing. And the experiences in your life can actually aim that, right? So what I say is basically genetics loads the gun, personality and psychology aim it, and your experiences pull the trigger. So it's that perfect storm of all three of those things that creates people who are going to hurt other people. It's not one thing. It's not bad experiences when you're a kid. It's not, just your personality. And it's certainly not, your genetics alone. It has to be all three of those things. So knowing that, educate yourself in those three areas. If you want to be able to walk around life and assess people and situations and be, not have to be hyper vigilant, but if you educate yourself and then you take in information passively, your body will tell you. The hair will stand up on the back of your neck. Your stomach will get a gurgling feeling. Something will tell you, hey, there's something wrong here. Pay attention. Be aware of your circumstances. Don't be walking in public with headphones in your own world and then be shocked when somebody takes advantage of that. It's, we've had so many cases where that's happened. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that whole garbage in, garbage out issue permeates life, everything you do. So how about intelligent, emotionally intelligent, actual educational information coming in, and experiential information coming in, and that is what you then build this foundation in your brain, in your subconscious, that will help you lead a better life, interact more humanely with other people, and not feel like there's this schism, like there's this side and that side. If you only listen to people who spout off one perspective, you're never going to have a balanced view of life, of any individual situation. It's going to skew you through and through. You're one person, right? So be balanced, diversify, learn from other people that think differently from you, take it in, process it, weigh it, see how your arguments do against those people. And maybe you're going to learn something. Maybe they're going to learn something.
Uh-huh. Yeah, there just is um there is no substitute for experience, and it's not to knock at all that foundational practice in reading and studying and doing what is needed, but you really cannot forget one or the other, and experience will trump it all. I mean, obviously, having a foundation and a good foundation, reading books and doing all those things, it's so true that it will be beneficial, and can probably help you jump the gun and skip and learn, right? If I was going to go down your path now, hours spent with you would help me rather than just jumping in there and having to
Right.
figure it all out myself. However, it is true. There's no way for me to just continue to read the books and do this and then say I'm a great profile, like I'm amazing. Whereas someone who jumps in and gets the experience is eventually going to get there if they're turning that lens of critical thinking back on themselves and on their actions. And it's really interesting. I've never heard anyone talk about the psychology aspect of potentially of nature and nurture, because what it does and it kind of leads towards the free will discussion. That's a fascinating discussion.
But also, personality and psychology are the filter through which you take in your experiences. So your experiences, you could have twins, right? One of them says, man, our parents, look at them. They struggle. They work 2 jobs just to feed us. They go without just for us. When I grow up, man, I want to take care of them. I want them to want for nothing. I'm going to buy them a house. I'm going to buy them a car. I'm going to do everything I can for them. And the other one says, look at them. They're failures. They can't even give us what we deserve. When I grow up, I'm going to kill them. Same exact genetics, same exact circumstances, different perspective based on their own personality and psychology. And I believe those kind of people, there are intervention points early on. Maybe when they get to be 30, it's too late. But up until then, there are intervention points. People can be turned around. Your psychology and personality are not, hardwired at that point. But once you get past that, it's very difficult. It's very difficult.
Wow. Jim, this is, and I have more. We'll kill it here only for the sake of us having to stop, but it's absolutely fascinating. This subject has always fascinated me. I know there's a million more stories that you have that we'll have to pull out. So I would love some of the time, maybe we'll get somebody else on too as well to bounce back. It would be pretty cool to pull in different perspectives of people who've done stuff like this.
Yeah, I have plenty of friends who do that, so I'd be happy to hook you up.
Would be awesome. Tell everybody though, I mean, I know you've got plenty of stuff out there and that you're doing. Where should people find more about you?
Well, Audible, I have 25 titles on Audible. So because of COVID, we pivoted to audio, and I have 2 podcasts, Real Crime Profile and Best Case, Worst Case, and you can find them everywhere you listen to podcasts and on the Identify app. That's Identify with an I at the end, not a Y. And then also, I did an audio play, sort of like with the old time radio plays with real actors. Joseph Fiennes plays the lead. It's called Bluebeard, and it's about the first serial killer. It's historically based, and it's about the first serial killer in LA. But Joseph Fiennes and Karen David did an amazing job as the leads, and 𝗦𝘂𝗯𝘀𝗰🐂 from Mindhunters. He was the seasoned FBI agent in Mindhunters. He plays the DA, and then Adrian Pashtar plays the private investigator in it. It's one of the most fun and intense and real things that I've created. So I'm very proud of it.
That's awesome. We will link to everything, of course.